What if I told you that one small state played a role in nearly every major chapter of early American history? Long before the United States existed, before the Revolution, before the Civil War, and even before the first English settlements took root along the Atlantic coast, the land we now call Maryland was already home to thriving native communities. Over the centuries, Maryland would become a place of exploration, religious freedom, conflict, revolution, and national transformation. Its rivers, bays, and battlefields would witness events that helped shape the destiny of an entire nation. Thousands of years before Europeans arrived, the region surrounding the Chesapeake Bay was inhabited by native peoples who had developed rich cultures and societies deeply connected to the land and water. Tribes such as the Piscataway, Nanticoke, and Susquehannock lived throughout the region, relying on fishing, hunting, farming, and trade. The Chesapeake Bay was one of the richest estuaries in the world, providing abundant fish, shellfish, and fertile farmland. Villages were established along rivers and waterways, creating trade networks that stretched far beyond the boundaries of present-day Maryland. These communities thrived for generations and understood the rhythms of the land in ways that European settlers would only slowly come to appreciate. The first major European contact came in the early 17th century. In 1608, English explorer John Smith journeyed through the Chesapeake Bay while mapping the region. Smith's reports described a land filled with opportunity. He wrote of vast forests, navigable rivers, fertile soil, and abundant wildlife. His descriptions captured the imagination of investors and colonial planners in England. To many Europeans, the Chesapeake region appeared to be a place where fortunes could be made and new societies established. The founding of Maryland was tied closely to religion and politics in England. During the early 17th century, Catholics faced significant discrimination and restrictions under English law. The Calvert family, headed by Cecil Calvert, envisioned a colony where Catholics could worship more freely while still remaining loyal subjects of the English crown. In 1632, King Charles I granted a charter establishing the colony of Maryland. The colony was named in honor of Queen Henrietta Maria, the king's wife. 2 years later, in 1634, settlers arrived aboard the Ark and the Dove and established St. Mary's City. This settlement became Maryland's first capital and the center of colonial government. Life was difficult in the early years. Colonists faced harsh conditions, unfamiliar environments, disease, and the challenge of building a new society from the ground up. Yet unlike some other colonies, Maryland initially enjoyed relatively peaceful relations with nearby native communities through negotiation and trade. As the colony grew, Maryland developed an agricultural economy centered on tobacco. Tobacco quickly became the colony's most valuable export, creating wealth for landowners and attracting additional settlers. Plantations expanded throughout the region. Rivers became highways of commerce as ships carried Maryland tobacco across the Atlantic to European markets. Over time, the demand for labor increased dramatically, leading to the expansion of both indentured servitude and eventually the institution of slavery. Like many colonies in the Chesapeake region, Maryland's prosperity became intertwined with systems of labor that would have profound consequences for future generations. One of Maryland's most significant contributions to colonial history came in 1649 with the passage of the Maryland Toleration Act. Although limited by modern standards and applicable primarily to Christians, the law represented a remarkable experiment in religious tolerance for its time. In an age when religious conflict frequently led to persecution and violence, Maryland attempted to create a society where multiple Christian denominations could coexist. The colony became known as a place where people seeking greater religious freedom could build new lives. As the decades passed, Maryland continued to grow. New settlements emerged, trade expanded, and the colony became increasingly important within Britain's North American holdings. Yet Maryland's location also placed it at the center of larger imperial rivalries. England and France competed for territory and influence across the continent. Native nations were often drawn into these struggles as alliances shifted and frontier tensions increased. These tensions erupted during the French and Indian War. Although much of the fighting occurred farther west, Maryland played an important supporting role. Troops from Maryland joined British forces, and supplies flowed through the colony to support military operations. The war ultimately ended in British victory, but that victory came at a tremendous financial cost. Britain emerged from the conflict deeply in debt and sought new ways to generate revenue from its colonies. The British government began imposing taxes and regulations that many colonists considered unfair. Maryland residents, like many throughout the colonies, grew increasingly frustrated. They argued that they were being taxed without representation in Parliament. Protests spread. Political debates intensified. The relationship between Britain and its American colonies deteriorated rapidly. When the American Revolution finally began, Maryland became an active participant in the struggle for independence. Maryland soldiers fought alongside the Continental Army in numerous campaigns. One of the most famous moments involving Maryland troops occurred during the Battle of Long Island in 1776. A courageous group of Maryland soldiers launched repeated attacks against British forces, allowing much of George Washington's army to escape destruction. Their sacrifice earned them lasting recognition and demonstrated Maryland's commitment to the revolutionary cause. As the war continued, Maryland served as an important source of manpower, supplies, and support. Citizens contributed to the effort in countless ways, from serving in military units to providing food, equipment, and financial assistance. When independence was finally secured, Maryland helped shape the new nation. In 1788, Maryland became the seventh state to ratify the United States Constitution, officially joining the Union and helping establish the framework of the federal government. The young nation soon faced another challenge. In 1812, the United States found itself once again at war with Great Britain. Maryland's strategic location along the Chesapeake Bay made it a key target. British forces launched operations throughout the region and eventually turned their attention toward Baltimore. In September 1814, they attacked Fort McHenry, hoping to capture one of America's most important ports. For more than a day, British warships bombarded the fort. Throughout the night, rockets and artillery shells illuminated the sky. Observing the battle from a nearby ship was Francis Scott Key. As dawn broke, he saw that the American flag still flew above the fort. Inspired by the sight, he wrote a poem that would later become the Star-Spangled Banner, the national anthem of the United States. Once again, Maryland had become the setting for an event of national significance. During the 19th century, Maryland continued to grow economically and politically. Its cities expanded, industries developed, and transportation networks connected it to other parts of the country. Yet beneath the surface, tensions over slavery and states' rights were intensifying across the United States. Maryland occupied a unique position. It was a slave state, but it also maintained strong economic and cultural ties with the North. When the American Civil War erupted in 1861, Maryland found itself deeply divided. Some citizens supported the Union, while others sympathized with the Confederacy. The state's strategic importance was enormous. If Maryland had joined the Confederacy, the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., would have been surrounded by hostile territory. Federal authorities acted quickly to ensure Maryland remained within the Union. What happens when a state is forced to choose between North and South? Maryland faced exactly that question in 1861. Although Maryland remained in the Union, many citizens sympathized with the Confederacy. Maryland once again stood at the center of American history. The war brought some of its most significant fighting directly onto Maryland's soil. Neighbors found themselves on opposite sides of the conflict. Communities became divided. In September 1862, Union and Confederate forces clashed near Sharpsburg in the Battle of Antietam. The battle became the bloodiest single day in American military history. More than 22,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing in just one day. Although tactically inconclusive, the battle halted Confederate momentum advances into the North and provided President Abraham Lincoln with the opportunity to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. The consequences of that decision would reshape the nation forever. Following the Civil War, Maryland entered a new era. Industrialization transformed cities such as Baltimore into major centers of commerce and manufacturing. Railroads connected communities, immigrants arrived from around the world, and the state's economy diversified. Throughout the 20th century, Maryland continued to grow while maintaining its unique identity at the crossroads of North and South. Today, Maryland's history can still be seen throughout the state. From colonial settlements and historic churches to Revolutionary War sites, Civil War battlefields, and the waters of the Chesapeake Bay, reminders of the past are everywhere. Few states can claim to have played such a continuous role in the American story. During the early 1800s, Baltimore grew into one of the most important cities in America. Thanks to its busy harbor and thriving industries, Baltimore became a major center for trade, shipbuilding, and manufacturing. By the mid-19th century, it was the second largest city in the United States behind only New York. Immigrants from Europe arrived in large numbers, helping fuel economic growth and transforming Baltimore into a bustling urban center that connected the young nation to markets around the world. Maryland played a crucial role in one of the most important transportation revolutions in American history. In 1827, construction began on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, commonly known as the B&O Railroad. At the time, roads were slow, rivers did not reach every destination, and moving goods inland was expensive and difficult. The B&O Railroad was created to connect Baltimore with Western markets and maintain the city's economic competitiveness. It became the first major railroad in the United States and helped usher in a new era of transportation, commerce, and westward expansion. The success of the railroad inspired similar projects across the nation and fundamentally changed how Americans traveled and conducted business. The Chesapeake Bay has shaped Maryland's identity for centuries. Stretching across much of the state, the bay provided food, transportation routes, and economic opportunities long before European settlement. Throughout the colonial era and well into the 20th century, Maryland watermen harvested oysters, crabs, fish, and other seafood from its waters. The oyster industry in particular became enormously profitable during the 19th century, employing thousands of workers and supporting entire communities along the shoreline. Special sailing vessels known as skipjacks were developed specifically for oyster harvesting and became iconic symbols of Maryland's maritime culture. Even today, the Chesapeake Bay remains central to Maryland's economy, environment, and cultural heritage. Maryland has long embraced its colonial and equestrian heritage. In 1962, it became the first U.S. state to officially adopt a state sport, jousting. Although many people associate jousting with medieval Europe, the sport remained popular in Maryland for generations and developed into a unique local tradition. Competitive jousting tournaments continued throughout the state well into modern times, making Maryland one of the few places in America where a centuries-old sport remained part of local culture. This unusual distinction highlights how Maryland often preserves traditions that connect the present to the distant past. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, Baltimore became one of America's major immigration ports. While New York's Ellis Island often receives the most attention, hundreds of thousands of immigrants entered the United States through Baltimore's harbor. Germans, Irish, Poles, Italians, and many others arrived seeking opportunity and a better life. These immigrant communities helped shape Maryland's culture, neighborhoods, architecture, and economy, leaving an impact that can still be seen today. Maryland was once known as the breadbasket of the Chesapeake. While tobacco dominated much of Maryland's colonial economy during the 17th and early 18th centuries, many people don't realize that the state eventually transformed into one of the most productive agricultural regions in early America. By the late 1700s and throughout the 1800s, farmers across central and western Maryland began moving away from the labor-intensive tobacco trade and increasingly focused on growing wheat, corn, rye, and other grains. The state's fertile soil, rolling farmland, and favorable climate made it ideal for large-scale grain production. As harvests increased, flour mills sprang up along Maryland's rivers and streams, using water-powered machinery to grind grain into flour that could be transported to markets throughout the colonies and beyond. His agricultural boom helped fuel the growth of Baltimore, which emerged as one of the most important flour exporting ports in the United States during the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Ships loaded with Maryland grain and flour sailed to ports throughout the Atlantic, supplying food to growing cities, frontier settlements, and even foreign nations. The state's reputation for high-quality flour became so well known that Maryland products were sought after in both domestic and international markets. This shift from tobacco-based economy to a more diversified agricultural system not only increased prosperity but also helped Maryland weather economic downturns that affected other colonies or states dependent on a single cash crop. By becoming the breadbasket of the Chesapeake, Maryland established itself as a vital contributor to the food supply of a growing nation and laid the foundation for continued economic development in the decades that followed. Maryland began as a bold experiment in religious freedom on the edge of an unknown continent. Over the centuries, it witnessed the meeting of cultures, the rise of colonies, the struggle for independence, the birth of a nation, and some of the most defining moments in American history. Its rivers carried explorers, its fields fed a growing nation, its soldiers fought in America's wars, and its people helped shape the course of the United States. From the first native communities along the Chesapeake Bay to the arrival of English settlers, from the flames of revolution to the thunder of Civil War cannons at Antietam, Maryland stood at the crossroads of history time and time again. It was here that ideals of religious tolerance took root, where brave men and women fought for freedom, where Harriet Tubman risked everything to lead others to liberty, and where the defense of Fort McHenry inspired the words that would become America's national anthem. But Maryland's story is more than a collection of dates, battles, and historical landmarks. It is a story of resilience in the face of hardship, courage in moments of uncertainty, and the enduring belief that a better future is worth fighting for. In many ways, Maryland's history mirrors the history of America itself, a nation continually shaped by opportunity, sacrifice, innovation, and the pursuit of freedom. The next time you look across the waters of the Chesapeake Bay, walk the streets of Baltimore, or stand on the fields of Antietam, remember that you are standing where history happened. The echoes of explorers, Settlers, soldiers, freedom seekers, and ordinary citizens still linger across this remarkable state. And the story isn't over. Every generation adds a new chapter. If you enjoyed this journey through Maryland's fascinating past, be sure to like, subscribe, and join us for more incredible stories from American history. Because sometimes the greatest adventures aren't found in fiction, they're found in the pages of our own past.